The second takeaway point is the monetary system is dishonest. This is one of the most effective tools I have to demonstrate how this system is dishonest. In 1957, you can buy a 1,600 square foot home in Odessa, Texas for $13,500. That was equivalent to those $13,500 silver certificates. How many of you remember those silver certificates? I remember being a child, being able to go to the bank and take those and get the coin out, and that's kind of neat. That $13,500 bought 37,700 cartons of brown eggs. Now you might think, why are you talking about brown eggs? Well, there's a professor, they call him the professor of economics, out of California, UC Davis of all places. But he says if you really want to see the effects of inflation, he said you need to look at the brown egg population. And he said the reason brown eggs are sold as organic eggs, so they've not had any extra hormones introduced into them or other things to increase the production. And the brown egg and the chicken population that produces those has kind of tracked the human population, so you get a good feel, and you can see them as a good measurement for inflation. So I said, okay, I'll use that. In 1982, this house in Odessa that sold in 1957 was sold for, well, there was no lawful money available, at least in the early part of 82. Sold for $85,400, which, by the way, bought about the same number of cartons of brown eggs. That house was sold again in 2007, and that house, if it had sold for the lawful money coin, would have sold for $13,500. How do I know that? Because that amount of coins bought that many brown eggs. But what was recorded on the title was it sold for $175,000. So the result is that if I had bought that property in 1957 and sold it in 2007, Wayne over there is a CPA. So Wayne, if I bought and sold that and our currency happened to be eggs, how much tax would I have?
Zero.
That's right. I would have had no gain and no tax due. If I bought and sold the thing for lawful money, I would have had no tax due because I would have had no gain. But because we use these manipulated notes, all of a sudden, I have an alleged gain of $161,000. Boy, I'm feeling great. But the reality is, I would now have a tax due of $55,000. The result of which is a physical property loss of 25% of my original capital. Is the government allowed to tax your capital, Wayne?
No.
Absolutely right. So the purported gain is actually a quiet theft, in that it results in a physical property loss, i.e. you lose 25% of my $13,500 that I was supposed to keep. The government and the Federal Reserve Bank took from me. I lost 25% of my original capital whenever I engage in one of these transactions. So I had a loss with the perception of a gain. I call it a quiet theft. Same holds true if I bought stock. In 1962, I could buy 4 shares of IBM stock for $1,942, which came same with the silver certificates, which bought about 5,424 cartons of eggs. By 1982, after stock splits and etc., they're down there at the bottom, those 4 shares equaled 75 shares, which of course no lawful money was available, would have sold for $4,884, which would have bought, come on, 4,266 cartons of eggs. Even though it shows a gain, I would have actually had a little bit of a loss. And in 2007, those 4 shares with all the splits are now equal to 300 shares, which if I sold it would have been $30,501. Boy, that was great. That would have been great. But if I looked at it for lawful money, it was really a very small gain. So If I bought and sold it for eggs, I would have had a 17% gain. I would have had a tax due of 172 eggs. If I bought and sold it for lawful money, I would have had a 17% gain, and I would have had a tax due of $59. But because I was stuck using these phony baloney notes, I now have a purported gain of 94%, or $28,559. The alleged tax rate of long-term capital gains is still 15%. 15%, I would have had an inflation tax of 83%. So I wasn't taxed at 15%, I was taxed at 83%. Again, the result is a quiet theft because you have a false gain with an actual physical smaller result than you should have had. So the result, an 83% tax rate when you and I should only have a 15% tax rate. This is what our founding fathers warned us about. This is what they tried to explain to you, and Thomas Jefferson warned about. The corporations and banks that will grow up around you will deprive you of your property. If they're able to take the capital that you originally had in each transaction you make, boy, they love to do that. They love to add these fees too. Oh, don't worry about it. Your closing costs were only a couple of points, this, that, and the other thing. You'll make it back when you sell your house. I bet very few of you, if you've sold your house, have ever actually made any money. You have a perception that you did, but the reality is you lost capital. We have some old cases and some new laws. Thompson v. Butler was an interesting case that happened back in the 1870s. We had a period where Abraham Lincoln issued the greenback notes. Congress went ahead, the Supreme Court went ahead under the emergency conditions and allowed those notes to be used as legal tender with a provision that at some point in the future, like around 20 years, those notes would have to be redeemable at their face value for gold and silver. But basically it was like taking a loan for a 20-year loan and then you would get them back. Well, near the end of that period of time, and it actually didn't last quite that long because they then later ruled that they had to be redeemable. And so when this Thompson v. Butler situation was going on, this became, in one sense, moot because the notes, as it went up through and the Supreme Court decided to hear it, the notes all of a sudden Congress reinstituted that they should be redeemable. But they went ahead and they said a coin dollar is worth no more for the purposes of tender and payment of an ordinary debt than a note dollar. The law has not made the note a standard of value any more than a coin. Now this is interesting because we had a gentleman here in Texas, down in the Houston area in the spring, in the Klein Independent School District, who went and gave to the Klein Independent School District a $50 gold coin. And at that time, the $50 gold coin traded for about $1,000. And his tax bill was about $1,000. So he gave him the $50 coin, and the court said, a $50 gold coin is only $50. And they cited Thompson v. Butler here, that a note dollar is worth no more than the coin dollar. Well, as a result of this, Congress said, hey, wait a minute. Roger Sherman said, if what we're using as a medium of exchange can fluctuate in its value is no better than unjust weights and measures, well, our standard of measure is the silver dollar. We got to fix the law. So we fixed the law by requiring the Secretary shall redeem gold certificates owned by the Federal Reserve Banks at times and the amounts the Secretary decides are necessary to maintain the equal purchasing power of each kind of United States currency. So to prevent the Thompson v. Butler from ever happening again, the Secretary of Treasury is supposed to make sure that a note dollar and a coin dollar always have the same purchasing power. Well, of course they don't. And then, under 5117, which I quoted earlier, the Secretary may prescribe the form and denominations of certificates. The amount of outstanding certificates may be not more than the value for the purposes of issuing those certificates. And he's talking about the gold certificates that the Federal Reserve Bank is supposed to have at 42 2/9 of 5 troy ounce of the gold held against the gold certificates. So the law requires the raw gold value to be at 42 2/9 per troy ounce. Well, that only holds true if you're using silver coin. It doesn't hold true if you're using the Federal Reserve note. But the Federal Reserve note has been declared a legal tender, and as a legal tender, it meets the currency requirements that he's supposed to ensure have the equal purchasing power of that silver and gold coin. The present monetary arrangements of the United States are unconstitutional and anti-constitutional from top to bottom. That's all I can say. We are in a bad situation, and we, the people, are the only ones who can rectify it. Thompson v. Butler, again, was cited in this Crummy versus Klein Independent School District back in 2008. The Secretary of Treasury has failed in his duty to maintain the equal purchasing power. A $50 coin today has almost 40 times the purchasing power of the $50 note. 40 times. That's gross negligence on the part of the Secretary of the Treasury. So, I want to quickly review a couple of things, some monetary law differences between 1878 and 2011. In 1878 and today, we both had legal tender gold and silver coins. We both had a form of legal tender notes. Back in 1878, they were minted or printed by the U.S. government. They were greenbacks. Today, they're printed by the private bank. In 1878, as in today, those notes are ultimately an obligation of the United States, at least statutorily, not constitutionally. Those notes have been declared equal value. Again, we have, with Thompson v. Butler, the court said that, and as recently as 2008 in the Crummy versus Klein Independent School District, they said that. The notes were redeemable in 1878 by the time this case came up, and if you go to look on like Westlaw's website or FineLaw and you look at this Thompson v. Butler case, you will see that the court did say this case is kind of moot, but they went through and defined that a $1 is $1, meaning a note dollar and a coin dollar legally are both the same. But to prevent what's wrong with saying that, Congress said the Secretary of Treasury has to maintain the equal purchasing power. So therefore, $1 is $1. And you don't run into the problem that the Lord warned about, diverse weights and diverse measures are an abomination. In today, the notes in practice are irredeemable. Now, you don't have to believe me. Each of you can go up to Pearl Street in Dallas. Here. Pearl Street is where, just on the north side of Woodall Rogers is the Federal Reserve Bank. You can park there, walk down the road, go in, ask the security guard you're here to redeem Federal Reserve notes for lawful money. He'll walk you in. He'll sit you down and say, we don't have to obey the law. Well, yes, you do. And if they argue, if you put up a little bit of an argument, well, then some guys will come out with guns and say, you're out of here. And yeah, you'll probably get out of there when you see the guns. But the law does require them to redeem the notes, but they won't. And today, unlike in 1878, we now have this law that's on the books, Title 31, Section 5119, Section A. The Secretary of Treasury has the duty to maintain the equal purchasing power. So we can't be inflated or deceived or ripped off or whatever you'd like to, whatever words you can think of, from the value we are supposed to receive.